come up with. Thank you for that. So before we get into our panel discussion, we're going to have a few remarks from Nonso Umunna, who is our longtime Kids Count director, and he's going to say a bit more about Kids Count.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us on this very hot, toasty day. It's a pleasure to have all of you here. So before I begin delving into the 2024 Kids Count data book, I want to first talk about what Kids Count is and how it came into being. So the Kids Count was started by the Annie Casey Foundation in 1990, and the goal was to provide legislators, policymakers, children advocates with reliable data, policy recommendations, and tools to advance policies that benefit children and their families. It also advances policies that connect children to quality education, healthcare, parents to economic opportunities, and communities to better ways of working on behalf of families. There are two projects in the part of the Kids Count national project, the Kids Count data book, which I will talk about, and also the online resource that we have called the Kids Count Data Center. We at MDCEP maintain that data center for Maryland, and we have up to 165 indicators covering a wide range of issues on the Kids Count Data Center. Kids Count is in all 50 states, including DC, Puerto Rico, and the US Virgin Islands. So you can see these are all the Kids Count grantees in all the 50 different states. As I talked about before, we have the Kids Count Data Center. It has a lot of information there on race and ethnicity data, state data, national data, and also it has county by county data when it's available. We always encourage people to use it, but also to make recommendations to us if there is any data that you feel that should be on there. And if it is available, we'll add it up to the Kids Count Data Center. Our goal is to make it easier for the public and policymakers to access data easily. Next slide. So the Kids Count data book looks at, since it started in 1990, and I was able to look at the book from 1990, there was few data then, but now there's a lot of data. But one thing that's been consistent, it has had a focus on 4 key areas: health, education, family and community, and economic well-being. And each domain that I mentioned has 4 indicators, so about 16 indicators in overall. These are then ranked, and there's an overall child well-being ranking for the states. Next slide. So let's take a look at what's in the Kids Count data book. So like I mentioned previously, there is a ranking system in the Kids Count data book that looks at overall child well-being. As you can see, Maryland this year is ranked 22nd. You can see the states that are ranked top: New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Utah, Vermont, and Minnesota. And the bottom states: Oklahoma, Nevada, Louisiana, Mississippi, and New Mexico. So I just wanted to there's a lot of data in this Kids Count data book, so I just want to pick out just a few that I think will be of interest. So economic well-being, we have children who are living in poverty. Before I begin, I just want to make clear that the data we're looking at here is from 2022. And most of the other data as well compares the pandemic data, pre-pandemic to after the pandemic. So that's part of what you'll be seeing in the data, which is why we have 2019 here in comparison to 2022. So in Maryland, we have about 155,000 kids who are living in poverty. So these are children who are living in a household of 2 parents, 2 children, who are below the 100% poverty threshold. That is a family that's making an income of less than $29,678 in 2022. So you can see before the pandemic, the number was 12% of kids in Maryland were living in poverty. That number has remained the same in 2022. I just wanted to point out that of that 155,000 kids, 63,000 are 64,000 are Black kids, and 38,000 are Latino kids. So more than half of the kids who are living in poverty in our state are Black or Latino children. The other data it's children whose parents lack in secure employment. This is where neither parent is fully employed. The number from the pre-pandemic was 24%. That number has gotten better after the pandemic to about 22%. Another one I wanted to point out that I think is very important in our discussion today that touches several aspects of the challenges families are facing is children living in households with high housing cost burden. This is where families spending about 30% of its income on housing cost alone. Now, the Kids Count Data Book looks at issues every year. As you will see this year, we focused on education, but last year we focused on childcare. And the finding found that single mothers are spending about 25% of their income on childcare. So you can imagine if it's a single mother household, you're spending 30% of your income on housing costs, 25% on childcare, you're left with not a lot of income to meet some of your child's basic needs. So we have about 402,000 kids who are living in a household facing high housing cost burden. That's almost close to the population of Anne Arundel County. So that number has gotten better, slightly better from pre-pandemic to now. Next slide. Thank you. So we also have in health low birth weight. That's about 8.7% in 2019. That has remained the same. This is that number has improved over the years. If you look at historic data. Children without health insurance. This is an area where we have done well since the ACA came into inception, but we still have 60,000 kids, and the number has increased slightly from the previous, from pre-pandemic to now. We still have 60,000 kids who are without health insurance, and that is still 60,000 kids too many. Children and teens per deaths, per 100,000 deaths, we have 24 prior to the pandemic rate, and it has gone up to 28. Next slide, please, Kat. Family and community, we're looking at the number I wanted to highlight, the two here, children living in high poverty areas. This is below 50% of the federal poverty threshold. We have about 46,000 kids, 4%, between 2013 and 2017. I'm going to jump ahead of myself. And for 2018 and 2022, that number is 3%. So it's gotten slightly better. Teen births per 1,000, another area where we have seen significant improvement over the years, and something I think in the course of this discussion we can also learn as we seek to tackle some of the issues we'll be talking about. That number has improved for a very long time, but it still is been getting significantly better. So we have about 14 per teen births per 1,000, and now it's 11 post-pandemic, after pandemic. Next slide. So like I mentioned previously, the Kids Count Data Book has focuses on issues every single year it's been released. And this year, the focus was on education. And what we found in looking at education is that the pandemic had a significant impact on children's educational achievement. Now I have to mention that since, like I said previously, this is 2022 data, things have, there have been policies that the state has implemented that probably, we believe, if we'll implement it, we'll have, and the panelists, wonderful panelists will be able to talk about it, will have probably a significant impact, will have a positive impact on reading achievement. But I just wanted to look at, for us to look at some of the numbers. So we still have just about 54% of our children between the ages of 3 and 4 who are not in school. So that is a very significant thing to look at, because we were talking about early childhood education that impacts future child performance in many ways in school. So we have more than half of the kids in our state who are not in school, young children between the ages of 3 and 4. For fourth grade graders not proficient in reading, we have about, before the pandemic, we have 65% who are not proficient in reading, so about 35%. 35% who are proficient. Now the number has gotten about 4 percentage points worse with the pandemic, and that number is now 69%. So just 31% of our kids in the state are reading proficient, fourth graders. Eighth graders, proficiency in math, that's the place where we took a big hit. Prior to the pandemic, we still had just 33% of our kids who are proficient in math. And after the pandemic, we just have just 25% who are proficient. So the numbers got worse for us, and that happened in most of the states in terms of education. Next slide. So I just wanted to delve deeper into the numbers because if we're talking about any number, we can only tell who to focus our resources on if we are able to disaggregate data. So the data shows that of all the kids, just 31% of the kids who were at or above proficient in reading and math, if you look at proficiency rates for Black students, it was just 20%, and for Hispanic students, just 15%. If you factor in poverty, we have just 1 in 6 fourth graders who are attending high poverty schools, just 16%, and 1 in 7 kids eligible for free or reduced school meal, 14% who are proficient in reading. And even if you look at kids who are learning, English learners as well, the number is actually just 6%. Next slide, please. So for math, we have just 25% of 8th graders who are proficient in math, and I should mention previously, which is significantly worse from prior to the pandemic, about 8% less than it was, less than it was in the before the pandemic. Only 9% of Black students and 10% of Latino students were proficient in math, and only 8% of students attending high poverty schools and 9% eligible for free and reduced school lunch were proficient in math. Next slide, thank you. So just overall, one of the things also the data book does is that it looks at also some of the other factors, because most of the issues we're talking about today can't just be resolved. It's not just classroom related. We also have other factors that are outside of the classroom. So we have 33% of Maryland students, 287,000, who are chronically absent. So they missed about 10% during the school year attendance. And we had 1 in 3 students who were undergoing 1 or more adverse childhood experiences, such as family economic hardship or their parents being separated or facing jail time in school. So when a child is experiencing some of these challenges, it's difficult for them to perform in school. So these numbers we're looking at in terms of education has an impact, just an economic impact as well, because the kids we're talking about today are the mid 21st century workforce. These are the kids we're talking about. And the report shows that not just in our state, but just nationwide, we're not really equipping our kids yet with the tools they need to be able to meet the 21st century workforce. So it also shows that the drop that we talked about in math scores between 2019 and 2022 could result in about 900 billion in lost income for the 49 million pandemic era students. So not being able to get high paying jobs would have an impact on the kids in the future. So less than a third of the kids we talked about here on pace to have math and reading skills for the careers of the future, which we know are mainly heavily in the STEM area, especially the high paying jobs. Next slide. Thank you. As I mentioned previously, the STEM jobs make up a quarter of the workforce. Job in the workforce, about 36 million jobs. These positions, as we know, pay well, like software developer, data scientists, industrial machinery mechanics. These are all jobs that are open to math proficient job seekers, and which is why it's important for us to make sure that our kids, we improve the achievement of our kids in math, which is just, even as we can see prior to the pandemic, the numbers weren't that good, and it's gotten worse at 25%. US gross domestic product would also have been larger in 2019 if we had factored in and dealt with race, ethnic, and gender disparities in educational achievements and had eliminated that in the past previous 3 decades. Next slide. So these are most of the resources we have for Kids Count. Like I said, you can reach out to us if you want to seek any data and you want us adding any data. Most of the information is here. And thank you very much. I'll hand it back to Ben.
Thank you, Nonso, for providing that foundation for our conversation today. I am excited now to turn to and welcome our panelists to talk more about what this looks like on the ground in terms of what Maryland families are facing and how our policy choices as a state improve outcomes for families. Our panelists today are Special Secretary Carmel Martin with the Governor's Office for Children, Ojeda Hall, Executive Director of Child First Authority, and Queen Nwafor, Education Policy Specialist with the Maryland State Education Association. Before we get started, I would invite each of you to share a bit more about your background and how you come to this work. And Secretary Martin, I think we'll start with you.
Thanks so much. First, I just want to thank you, Ben, and for the Maryland Center for Economic Policy and the Casey Foundation for sponsoring, doing this work. It's critically important, and just thrilled to be able to be here and enter into a conversation about it. I was appointed by Governor Wes Moore in January as Special Secretary for the Governor's Office for Children, which is a reinvigorated office under a new executive order issued by the governor to support government-wide efforts to support children and families in Maryland, and with a particular focus on driving the governor's agenda around ending child poverty. I also serve as a senior advisor to the governor on economic mobility, so try to support work across the cabinet in that way as well. I come to this work after too many decades for me to say out loud, working on issues of supporting children and families and tackling poverty, improving economic mobility. Much of my work has been on the federal level. I spent about 10 years in the United States Senate working for various senators, and was at the Department of Education during the Obama administration working on education. And then most recently, I served as domestic policy advisor for Vice President Kamala Harris and spent 2 years as the deputy director at the Domestic Policy Council for President Biden, working on economic mobility. So really, really excited about the opportunity that Governor Moore has given to me to do this work here in Maryland, and really excited to join you all today.
Thank you. We're so excited to have you. Ojeda, I'm going to turn to you next.
Good afternoon, and let me thank you, Ben, and the Maryland Center on Economic Policy. And I'm excited to share this panel with the very distinguished Queen and Secretary Carmel Martin. Thank you also to Annie E. Casey for making this work possible. I am the executive director of the Child First Authority of Baltimore. Child First was founded in 1996 out of a parent action where after a young person was killed, we came together as a community in Baltimore and said, we have to provide after school and out of school time resources for the parents and families in Baltimore. And in that way, put children first. And so we're excited that almost 30 years later, we are here and we've been providing high quality out of school time and after school programming for children in Baltimore. I've been thinking a lot of why I do the work that I do now. And a quick story, in 1983, I was born in Baltimore. My father graduated from City College and my mother from Eastern College, but they didn't have the skills to maintain a healthy relationship. And so after my parents' divorce, we moved to New York City. In 1983, a knock on the door at my junior high school in Brooklyn, New York, and where a man came in and said, give me one kid from this school. We are experimenting and piloting a program for gifted and talented minority students. And if you give me one child, we're going to wrap around them the kinds of services and support that will guarantee, most likely that, we'll guarantee that they'll be successful. And I was that one child. I was that one child that hit the lottery that day in 1983. And that meant what was wrapped around me were cultural experiences, exposures to trips to the Caribbean to build houses for children living in poverty, private education, amazing summer jobs, all the things that any child and any parent would want for their child, and any child would need to be successful. And so when I think about the students of Baltimore City, I don't want them to have to hit the lottery to have the basics that they need to thrive and flourish in their education.
Thanks, Ojeda. And we know Child First Authority is doing tremendous work across the city. Another one of our great partners, MSCA. Queen, tell us about your work and why you're here today.
Thanks so much, Ben. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Queen Wepor. Just want to extend similar thanks to Ben, to MDCEP, and to the Annie E. Casey Foundation. I am a bit congested this afternoon, so hopefully you all can still hear me pretty well. So I'm a policy specialist with the Maryland State Education Association, and we are the largest labor and teachers union in the state, with roughly 75,000 members across all the counties except Baltimore City. And so similarly to the distinguished panelists, my career path has been pretty diverse. And in its diversity, it has allowed me to view education policy from multiple angles. That included work at the federal level with soon-to-be senior U.S. Senator Chris Van Hollen, in different education sectors, both the charter school sector, the labor, traditional union sector, as a member of the school leadership team, and as my most important and first job as a classroom educator to students in Baltimore City. But more than my professional experience, I come to this work as a first-generation American who's committed to education as a tool for upward and economic mobility, and thus as a change agent. In my current work with MSEA, I'm able to bring these experiences and my identity to do really exciting work and transformative work around the blueprint for Maryland's future. And so I get to support our 23 local affiliates and staff with the successful, and it will be successful, implementation of the blueprint. And so we know the blueprint represents a culmination of the many ideals that we all here support and believe in, and I have advocated for throughout my career. And so super excited to be doing this work, to know that the blueprint can be not only revolutionary, for Maryland, but for the nation. And so I'm glad to be here this afternoon and looking forward to the discussion.
Great. So I'd like to hear from each of you what your reaction to the Kids Count data is, and how does it compare to what you see in your everyday work? Did anything surprise you? Ojeda, let's start with you on this question.
Thank you. Well, I think we're all going to agree that there's some shocking, and when Nonso disaggregated the data, even more shocking and painful for some of us to see. But let me start by saying that so many of our children and parents are absolutely wonderful. There's a story of one of our students at Leith Walk Elementary Middle in Baltimore who, because his mother taught him the Heimlich maneuver in a situation when one of his fellow students had gotten a bottle cap lodged in their throat, and the teachers could not, didn't know what to do, this young student, fourth grader, was able to dislodge that bottle cap and save the life of one of his students. We've seen little boys and students. There's one little boy in our program who did not miss a single day of his schooling last year, or this past year, and our wonderful supporters bought him a bike that thrilled him. There are great things happening in our schools. There are great children and parents that are attending and part of our school communities. But let me say, obviously, when you look at the 69% of students who are not proficient in reading and the 75% in math, and when you just aggregate that and you find out that what's 20% proficiency among Black students in Baltimore, and when you think about Baltimore City being a largely a city full of Black students, particularly in public schools, it is disheartening. When there are not enough academic supports in the classroom or the ability to pull kids out of the classrooms, I am not surprised at this data. When you understand that there's not enough educators to provide for smaller class sizes in our school buildings. I'm proud that Child First and our after school program have a 15-to-1 ratio of teacher to student. But when you can't do that every day, I'm not surprised. And when there's not enough mental health support, I mean, really real mental health support that can help meet our children where they are post-COVID. And let me say, COVID exacerbated a problem that was already there, didn't cause these problems, but really just showed all of us what they were, and certainly didn't help with these scores. I'm not surprised. And so I think the good news is I love the Enough Act that has come out by the governor, because there's not enough supports, there's not enough small classrooms, there's not enough mental health. And so hopefully this will be part of the difference in making sure there's enough resource for us to partner with schools, kids, and parents to change these statistics. I'll pause there.
Queen, how about you? What was your reaction to the data?
Yeah, similar a reaction to Ojeda. And unfortunately, the biggest reaction was that I wasn't surprised, right? Like, again, when we are considering the impact and toll that COVID-19 had and played on schools, on families, when we think about remote learning and the disruption to learning, when we think about inconsistent attendance, again, this impacted both families and students alike. And so we know that we're still in recovery mode, right? And so the data is not surprising. It's pretty aligned with NAEP scores and data that was released in 2022 for our nation's report card. And so Maryland is in the middle of the pack, and we're working on getting us to the top, right? We have a huge slate of education leaders and advocates in our state agencies and across Maryland who are committed to that. And so that's promising for me. I think about Nonso's explanation and of chronic absenteeism, and we know that there are a lot of just interventions and strategies being utilized across our schools to support things like attendance, right? From attendance committees in schools, from PTAs gathering to make sure that there are plans in place to reach out to students who are consistently absent for more than 3 days. So there is, there are some bright spots, I should say. It was also helpful to see some resilience in the graduation rates. So despite the pandemic challenges, it was a small bright spot to see that high school graduation rates remain stable. And again, hoping and knowing that we're working to trend that upward. But still, right, like in order to really shift what we've seen in this data towards Maryland being at the top and not in the middle, and seeing some of those worse to better trends, right? We know we have to fully fund the blueprint and maintain its promise to Maryland students. So I'm excited and get hope by some of the work that is happening with the blueprint. So increased urgency for early childhood education expansion, especially given the pandemic related setbacks for our students in highest concentrations of poverty. As Ojeda said, targeted interventions, right, for our students that we saw, like our Black students, our Hispanic students, our students with disabilities, our multilingual learners, right, our homeless youth, right? We have to be very strategic in offering supports there. We also have to think about, again, the stress and then the mental health and social emotional learning component that has to be grappled with in a really tangible and specific ways to support students. And so we see that happening with the blueprint for expanding early childhood education. We see the expansion of community schools throughout the state that is taking a holistic approach to providing wraparound supports for students, not only for students, but for their families as well, right? So we're thinking about the whole child. We're thinking about the needs of families as well, because we know that it's a community and collective approach. So in short, right, like not surprised by the data, but definitely hopeful that there are some promising trends that are taking place through statute, or because of statute, I should say, that's going to, I hope and believe, will turn some of that data upward in the next coming years to address the gaps that we're currently seeing.
Secretary Martin.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, I think I would echo a lot of what my two colleagues have lifted up. I mean, big picture, I would say the data is unacceptable. I think that if the governor was here, he would also say that to be true. For a state as wealthy and resourceful and compassionate as we are in Maryland, we have to see this data as just unacceptable. And this is what's driving our work across the Moore Miller administration every day. You know, as Nonso pointed out, this data is from 2022, so it predates the governor's governorship, but we are definitely using it to drive our action. For example, the data with respect to healthcare, our fabulous Secretary of Health Laura Herrera Scott is working very hard to ensure that as pandemic relief is being pulled out of the system, that we're keeping families wherever possible enrolled in Medicaid. Very excited about legislative action in the last session to ensure that children 0 to 5 who participate in CHIP do not have to go through a redetermination policy, so can keep stable access to healthcare. So I'm hopeful that if we have more, when we get more up-to-date data, we'll see positive shifts in that regard. Likewise, with respect to education, we agree with what Queen pointed out. This data predates implementation of the blueprint, the blueprint's being phased in. So really hopeful that the resources that are being directed to our schools will help us tackle these unacceptable results with respect to absenteeism and proficiency in math and reading, and the mental health and well-being of our children more holistically. We're really at the Governor's Office for Children excited about the focus on the concentration of poverty grants and the focus on wraparound services, so we can ensure that children are getting those supports that they need to be successful. Our teachers are working so hard every day. We need to provide, make sure that it doesn't all fall on their shoulders as our children are facing really historic challenges in their daily lives. I guess the last thing that I would say, and Nonso got to this, is you really do need to just get underneath the hood of this data, which is exactly what we're looking to do with the Enough initiative. It's unacceptable that we have a 12% child poverty rate in Maryland, but it's even more unacceptable that in so many communities across our state, we have much, much higher poverty rates. The Enough initiative is focused on communities with 30% or more children living in poverty. We have 120 of those. That is just not acceptable, and that's why we're really looking to do a full court press to tackle that challenge and support people living in those communities to be able to be the drivers and really be at the forefront of the change that we know we need to see there.
I want to turn to something that's come up already a little bit. You know, this year's Kids Count data book put a major focus on educational outcomes for kids, and it's clear across the country, Maryland's not unique that in this, that schools and students are still facing a lot of challenges. What's a bit different here in Maryland is that we are in the early stages of implementing major education reforms, which are known as the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. And so I think, Queen, can you talk a little bit about why the blueprint's important and how implementation is going? We mentioned it in passing a little bit. Let's expand on that a little bit for our audience. And what are you hearing from the educators who are doing the work?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. Again, I want to just say and to reiterate the point that the blueprint in its inception didn't anticipate a global pandemic, right? And so it is working really hard to undo, right, some setbacks that we didn't anticipate. But while setbacks were created, it also provided opportunities to reimagine and strengthen Maryland's education system, right? And so as the data that Kids Count demonstrated, and like I said, that NAEP scores demonstrated, it shows us like where we are and where we are going to get to. And as Special Secretary Martin said, right, the unacceptable data that is before us. So I'm gonna like just kind of walk through the blueprint based on like the 5 pillars, or four of the pillars of the 5 pillars, and just then talk through with us about like the implementation of what we're seeing and what I'm hearing as well. So in pillar 1 of the blueprint, we see early childhood education, right? This is an area for our earliest learners, and we know that is crucial for setting a strong foundation, right? We must get early childhood education correct and right in order to set our students up for the most promising trajectory. So we're doing this in the blueprint by expanding access to full day pre-K at no or reduced cost for, again, those students in our highest concentration of poverty. We call those tier 1 students who are whose families have incomes that are 300% or less of the federal poverty level. We have the expansion of Judy centers and Patty centers to provide wraparound services and support not just academic readiness, right? We're thinking constantly about this whole child approach to ensuring that our students are successful developmentally, socially, emotionally, right? For our families and our students. When we go to pillar 2, and this is really important for the work that I do and for our members, we have high quality, diverse teachers and leaders, right? So the blueprint recognizes that great teachers are the backbone of a strong education system, full stop, right? And so it does look at this and addresses this and considers this in several ways. We're raising starting salaries to $60,000 across the state by 2026 and offering incentives upwards of $17,000 to students, or to teachers rather, teaching in low performing schools or earning national board certification. And this is just the floor, it's not the ceiling, right? We have school systems across the state going above and beyond because they understand the urgency of now and getting our teachers the most support they need to do their jobs well. And we know that strong teachers directly impact student achievement and well-being for students and programs. And we also know the importance of having a diverse workforce, right? So the blueprint also imagines having a workforce that reflects the diversity of the the students that they teach. This includes administrators in the buildings, right? Your principals, your assistant principals, right? Needs to reflect not only the diversity of our students, but of our state. So that is work that's being done around retention and recruitment of diverse teachers. We have in pillar 3, college and career readiness, that addresses, again, some of the direct concerns that we saw in the kids count data. There was recently a newly established college and career readiness standard to be met by 10th graders. And so while we're raising standards in an equitable manner, we're also providing support pathways for students who may not meet some of these standards, and making sure that students too have different avenues of access while they're in high school. We also see in the blueprint expansion of career and technical education, right? Super important to the economic advancement of the state of Maryland, right? To fill in some of those jobs we saw in the data around the STEM workforce, right? And so we're getting industry recognized credentials for students through career and technical education. And then finally, just to touch on pillar 4 around just more resources for students, we see the blueprint expand community schools and offer funding to expand community schools. This includes crucial wraparound services, and again, addressing both academic and non-academic barriers for students and their learning. So all of this considered, just shared a lot of information about what's happening in the blueprint. I would say with implementation, it's happening at different levels depending on where you are in the state, right? Some places it's happening faster and at greater ease. And there are lots of reasons for this. Some include funding, some include the need for greater technical assistance around like how to implement some of these requirements of the blueprint. A lot of it includes messaging around the need for why this is necessary, the urgency of now, and reimagining what school districts were doing previously and what they're called to do now as a result of the blueprint. And I'm happy at least to see a lot of bright spots in all areas across the state. We see huge work being done with community schools in Baltimore County and Baltimore City. A lot of great career and technical education work happening in Prince George's County, and then really unique strategies and financial incentives for educators in Western Maryland, right? So there are a lot of bright spots taking place. And as I think we continue to just implement the initiatives of the blueprint, the programs, we're going to continue to see improvements that have not yet been reflected in some of the data that was shared with us today. So our focus now is ensuring that these ambitious plans are fully and effectively implemented. that our educators understand all the components and the needs that are being asked of them, that our students understand, that our families understand, and that we're working together to ensure that the vision of the blueprint is a reality for every student in the state of Maryland.
As you said, one of the important pieces of the blueprint was to increase supports for children outside of the classroom, whether it's increasing the number of community schools or expanding tutoring after school programs. And this year's data book also highlights these as best practices for improving student success in school. Ojeda, I'm wondering if you could talk about what kinds of additional supports are available to Maryland students. I know this is one of CHF's core areas, and why those additional supports are important.
Yes, well, let me start by providing a common definition, because there's so many definitions of what community schools are, right? So one approach and one way to think about it is that it's a strategy to transform the school into a place where all stakeholders, so educators, local community members, families, students can work together to strengthen conditions for student learning and healthy development. So school as hub, and maybe a simplified definition is we are organizing resources for young people and organizing voices of stakeholders, and particularly parents, grandparents, family members, to know better what our students need. So the Child First model, where our intended impact is to help 12 schools, close to 6,000 young people. And in those 12 schools, 9 of them are out of school time programs for us as well. So the combination of community school, out of school time is sort of our superpower. And what we're finding is that when you do add those components, we're able to increase attendance. So we had a 90% attendance goal for the schools where Child First operates. Our data is showing we're at somewhere around 87% of students attending. When our program model calls for, it's sort of a 2+2 model. So after school, in our after school program, our students will do 2 hours of physical activity, sort of goes right at that children and teen who are overweight or the obesity piece. So 2 hours of physical activity. We bring in partner programs that do everything from kickball to basketball to some of the movement. And we're increasingly trying to add things like fishing and boating and different kinds of environmental exposures for kids to get out, get active. But the other 2 hours, 1 hour is uninterrupted academic instruction. And the beauty of that is that we're able to align to some of the curricula, for example, that the principals have, the goals that the principals have around reading and math. And so making sure that the principals are involved in trying to pull together a good plan for students in the after school time. And then the other 1 hour is an hour of enrichment. Other skill building could be cooking, could be dance, could be art, could be photography, could be it could be any number of high quality, what I call 5-star enrichment opportunities provided by partners. And again, what we're finding is where we're in those schools and community schools with our out of school programming, we're able to increase the reading proficiency of students, especially. So we have a strong focus there. And we're also seeing greater understanding of social emotional learning skills by targeting in that way in the out of school and summer hours. We have a summer program operating now. Part of our model is that we invest in high quality. We invest our budget in high qualified certified teachers. And so we're really making sure that we give our kids exactly what they deserve, which is the best. So yes, the tutoring the after school, the summer program, the partnership with the principals and the parents. And that's the other component I'll talk about is the family engagement piece. We were founded, out of advocacy and being able to listen critically to families about what they want to see. I think makes the entire state better, makes the school system better, that we're able to get that information to those who are decision makers, to know what are the things that families say would actually help them. There's so many parents who don't even have time to understand what is being taught in the classroom. And so interventions where we're engaging families to maybe help them know what the academic calendar looks like for their children and what their children are learning. But again, sadly, so many parents are not able to even understand to be able to help. And then I'll say finally, with some of the other stats around employment, certainly it feels like this is a time when so many families are struggling with high BGE bills, particularly in Baltimore City, high eviction rates. And so our model, and it's really a risk for us, has us taking some of our community schools money and providing a family stability fund that helps us purchase uniforms, helps us just give direct assistance to families, helps us have food pantries in 6 of our community schools. We're doing everything we can to meet the needs of children, because what child can really learn when they come to school ashamed perhaps of what they have on, not sure of what they're going to eat when they go home. So it's a big job, and all of us, I think one of my griefs is around we have so many resources in our state, but being able to organize those resources and direct them to the needs of children. This is a time for organization and organizers. And so that's how we try to approach the resource opportunity and challenges that we have.
So this has been a great conversation. We've been talking about what happens in schools, and the classrooms are not the only thing affecting children's well-being in Maryland. As a parent of 2, I'm well aware of that too. The experience of growing up in poverty, we know from the data, is deeply linked to success both in school and later in life. Secretary Martin, can you talk about the Enough Act, which you mentioned a little bit earlier, and other initiatives that the Governor's Office for Children is looking at to address childhood poverty in Maryland?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. And so inspiring to hear Ojeda and Queen talking about the exciting work that they're doing across the state. The Enough initiative is a first of its kind community-based investment strategy to address concentrated child poverty. As you mentioned, Ben, when children grow up in areas, place matters. And we do have neighborhoods all across the state where as many as 50% of children are living in poverty. And it is harder for the children in those communities, even the children who are not living in poverty, to experience economic mobility. So many of these communities they didn't happen by accident. Often what happened was they have experienced the impact of decades of disinvestment and policy actions that have really systematized what is often racially discriminatory action. So they didn't happen overnight. We're not going to create the change we want to see overnight. But what we do know is that we need to be tapping into the tremendous opportunities in these communities, because there are people with great potential. And our job is to provide the people living in the communities with the tools and support they need to create the community that they want to see. So it's very much based on building a civic infrastructure at the community level to do the type of work that Ojeda is describing in terms of having community members come around data to look at where are the challenges, where are the opportunities, and saying what is our vision for our community, and how can we at the state level help them take action against that vision. As the governor often says, those who are closest to the problems are closest to the solutions. So a big piece of this initiative is empowering people in these communities to take action. We just released a notice of funding opportunity recently, and we're asking communities that are interested in this program to file notices of intent to apply by the end of this week, July 19th. The reason for that is so that we can, once we see who is interested in engaging in this program, that we can help provide them with supports around the application process. We have 3 different grant tracks that will be dependent on the readiness of the community, but big picture, we're looking to support community action that's focused on evidence-based interventions that are focused on 3 core objectives: unlocking children's potential through early care and education, supporting healthy and economically secure families by ensuring good paying jobs and quality health care, and creating safe environments for children to thrive and prosper in their communities. A lot of the work we're doing tracks very well with the Kids Counts data points, and we'll be pulling together data at the neighborhood level for communities that are interested in applying. We're tapping into the agencies across government to create data dashboards to inform the work at the community level. We're also funding local management boards in each of the 24 Maryland jurisdictions to help build the capacity for local community-based organizations to carry out this kind of cross-sector community revitalization work. We're looking to build on the work of not supplant, but absolutely build on the work of the blueprint as schools are looking to put in place community school models. How can we help the community step forward and bring resources to the schools, community school efforts? And the other thing I would say that this is very much an all of government's approach. The governor will be working with agencies across the Moore-Miller administration to make sure that they are prioritizing wherever possible enough jurisdictions with respect to their grant programs, their financing options, their case management options. But big picture, the governor often talks about how this is not just a program, but a way of governing. So he's asked me and the rest of his cabinet to work through our children's cabinet to make sure that we are deploying the principles undergirding enough throughout everything we do. So being data and evidence driven, making sure that the voices of the communities and the people that we're supporting are first and driving the action that we're taking, but also being willing to break down barriers and silos so that we can meet people where they are. People don't live their lives where they're, in departments the way that government often behaves. So our big part of our job, through enough, but across the board, is to make sure that we are thinking across healthcare, education, workforce, so that we're being able to deliver the most effective and impactful services and supports for people across the state.
Well, I really appreciate this conversation. I know Secretary Martin, I think we are about to lose you, and we're running up on time for everyone else as well. I think what we're going to do here, we wanted to close up with some additional policy priorities. We just heard a tremendous list of ideas from the Secretary, and I think what we'll do is we'll follow up by email with our attendees with additional thoughts from Queen and Ojeda, as well as a recording of this call. I really appreciate everyone. Again, thank you. And we hope that you are all staying cool on this hot day and have a great rest of your week. Thank you so much.
Thank you.